If Boris Johnson manages to pull off a good deal, and when I say good deal, I mean a deal that seems acceptable both to party and public, then he may assume some sort of hero status, not least after a very patchy 12 months in office, plagued by coronavirus and the government's response to it. So we could have a scenario where finally at the end of the year the Prime Minister pulls off a political victory and is hailed as a great statesman who has managed to get the EU to concede a number of different issues that have been sticking points during the talks since 2016. So this is a kind of 4-year-long saga that could finally end with success. That of course will do the Prime Minister no political harm whatsoever, and he could in fact reset his entire administration for 2021 with a completely different focus on a post-Brexit future with a deal, but also while expanding trade relations with other nations. If he can always hark back to the fact that he did, as he promised, get Brexit done, then that's going to politically strengthen him. It's also going to give a bit more of a guarantee that people in red wall seats will continue to vote Tory. Boris Johnson then needs to build on that success and I suppose prove to that electorate, particularly in the Midlands and the North, that he is going to honour his levelling up commitments. That's going to be really difficult because economically we're facing huge adversity in the post-COVID future. I think in the event of a deal as well for Labour, a lot is going to have to rest on how Keir Starmer responds to that. It always means, of course, that Boris Johnson will be able to argue that he is the leader that got Brexit done and that Keir Starmer hasn't proved his statesmanlikeness, if that's a word, in any way. Boris Johnson will be able to continue this narrative of Keir Starmer being an observer to events. He's the person that sorts them out. Keir Starmer is the man sniping from the sidelines. Now, no deal is obviously far more complicated for Boris Johnson. He is going to have to argue his way out of accusations that it's been a failure of statecraft on his behalf that he hasn't managed to land this deal. If the talks end with a no deal, quite a lot depends on whether that has been because Boris Johnson has walked away from the negotiations, which I think he is highly unlikely to ever do, because he doesn't want to be blamed for ending the talks. He doesn't want to be the one who has to take responsibility for no deal. Equally, neither does Angela Merkel or Emmanuel Macron, so they can't walk away either. So actually we could get to a situation where come New Year's Eve, no one's walked away, but there's been no further progress, and so the talks just fizzle out, like that's it. It's no deal by default. Then the blame game begins in earnest in the new year. Well, this is down to the intransigence of the EU, Boris Johnson will of course argue. Now, I think that argument holds a lot of water with Brexit voters. It holds a lot of water with Labour voters who switched to the Tories in the red wall precisely because they were fed up being pushed around by the EU. And I think they'll probably have a degree of respect to the Prime Minister for holding our ground and saying we're not going to concede on these very significant points. However, of course, no deal opens him up to huge criticism from people who are already very vocal in their disapproval of all of the Prime Minister's methods and saying that he has failed. He has failed as a statesman, he's failed as a negotiator, he has reneged on his promises to the electorate. That's how they will spin it. And equally, it's going to be played out afterwards, isn't it, in the calamity that no deal causes. So if we've got a situation for the first 3 months of 2021, when everyone has already had it up to here with tiers 2 and 3 and not being able to get a vaccine and all the other problems that we've faced since March 2020, if you're then going to add to that queues of lorries on the A20 and the M20, people not able to get fruit and veg, a shortage of French brie in the supermarkets, businesses thrown into chaos because they can't get their tariff schedules sorted out, that is going to be really uncomfortable. I think if you speak to anybody involved in Brexit negotiations generally, they talk about this situation of short-term pain for long-term gain, but politically it's quite difficult to argue yourself out of chaos when you're in the middle of it and everyone and all of the newspaper headlines are saying this is a disaster and this is chaotic. You can't really easily say to the public, oh, well, don't worry, it's going to be all right in 2022. We've got another 3 years potentially until the election. If the economic situation stabilises and actually Britain can prove it can grow outside of the EU without a deal, some of these deals with Commonwealth countries and India and Africa and others could prove extremely lucrative. Imagine this, Boris Johnson gets to go into 2024 and into the polls and say, not only have we managed to recover economically from COVID, we're also thriving in the event of a no deal. It might be too soon to tell that, but let's just imagine that's the case. That puts him into a really strong position. It puts Labour into a very difficult position, but the people it puts in the worst position of all are the EU. Imagine a scenario where Britain leaves with the deal and thrives. I'd say that's pretty problematic for Brussels because it makes other member states wonder whether they might want to be minded to do the same. If Britain leaves with no deal and does really well, doesn't that leave Brussels with an existential crisis? Let's imagine a situation where it all goes horribly wrong. Economically, we haven't recovered from COVID, and economically, a lot of the statistics suggest that no deal has been a disaster. Well, then I think we can say that we can count the days until Boris Johnson might be ejected from office, either by party or by country.